Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Curious Neuron podcast. Today, I want to talk about social emotional learning in the classroom, and we've spoken about this in the home. We've spoken about this as parents and as kids individually. But I've been getting some questions regarding what teachers should be including in their classroom, what parents should expect from their schools. There is a blog post on the website curiousneuron.com if you'd like to read some tips in terms of what a parent should be looking for within the school, what questions you should be asking a school when it comes to their SEL curriculum. I also have a short YouTube video with Karl, my guest today, and I wanted to extend that conversation. So welcome back to Curious Neuron, but for the first time on the podcast, welcome, Karl.
Thanks, Cindy. Thanks for having me.
We've had a few of these conversations now, but with the mental health sort of crisis that a lot of people are talking about, a lot of changes in social emotional learning in kids and their skills, lots of aggression within schools that I'm hearing across the board, whether it's Canada or the States. I think we need to have this conversation in terms of like what SEL looks like within the school. And for those of you listening, when I say SEL or Carl will say it, we're talking about social emotional learning. Before we dig into this conversation, can you give me a little bit more, give me a little bit about your background?
Yeah. An educator, been in the game for over 2 decades now, but really, I started my SEL journey about 12 years ago. I was really lucky to be involved in a mental health and well-being framework that went right across Australia, and was lucky to be one of those people who become a facilitator of the framework at the school I was working at back in Melbourne, Australia. And then from there, um, really the penny dropped, didn't it? It was something that really struck me. And I always wanted to know a little bit about, not a little bit, I always wanted to know why children behave and why they make certain types of decisions, and how do I impact a child holistically within the classroom and across the education sector. So I've been doing this for a while now, and so day to day you'll find me at a beautiful elementary school called the Priory as the SEL coordinator. I'm also teaching grade 5 this year, so I'm doing both. Um, and then week to week and month to month, I'm across Montreal and Greater Montreal helping out schools with their SEL implementation.
That's a lot on your plate. I didn't know you had a
Yeah,
grade 5 class too.
yeah. It definitely keeps my finger on the pulse, as I say,
No
because I
kidding.
really do know what's going on, don't I?
Yes. Well, that's good because, that means you're working on this SEL, system and the curriculum, but you're also in the classroom. So you're seeing what makes sense in terms of having to teach kids or the problems that you need to help them with.
That's
Have
right.
you seen any changes after the pandemic? I know people are going to ask me about this. I need to ask you, but um,
Yeah,
because I know from a mental health standpoint, we were already seeing the increases before the pandemic. But I've never heard so many people reach out, like in terms of schools and parents saying there's been a change in my child. Have you been seeing the same thing in the schools?
yeah. It amazed me when we returned back from the pandemic. There was this big thing about learning loss. We have to catch the children up in regards to academics. But there was a really big developmental and social and emotional loss also, wasn't there? And so, if we're going to do this right, we need to reimagine education as a whole, and try and fix everything that I guess the pandemic impacted. But in saying that, for me, it was, I'm just going to jump onto what you said before, but our Ks, the grade 2s, were heavily impacted um, because of the fact that uh, that we're talking about 5 to 7 year olds who were at home the majority of the time. It's they started their schooling journey and they're spending it at home in isolation with an adult who's basically problem solving and doing all the responsible decision making for them, and rightly so, because we're at home and it's a tough time. But these children need to be with other children to make those mistakes and then learn from them. So and we also found that demographic also they had behavior problems and was interpreted as behavior problems, but it wasn't. It was actually social problems, not being able to to really read what was happening within the class or outside in the schoolyard. So that was one demographic. The other one is our teens. The teens really found it difficult. They were isolated.
Mm.
We're talking about a group of students who, their brain is, they're hovering away from that, the catchment of mum and dad. And it's all about your friends then, it's all about that reward period, the brain shifting. So to put our teens into an isolated space was really hard on them in terms of their mental health for sure.
Yeah, I've been seeing the same changes too, like within the parents I've spoken with. One thing that I tell parents is not to be too worried because it's a skill. You
No,
can start working on it and working on it more. What do you think, given the work that you've been doing and where we're sort of moving forward with this, is there anything missing or we just need to, double down on this SEL and say this needs to be across the board in all schools? Because I don't think it is in all schools yet, right?
no, yeah. I just think that schools just need to develop an awareness, a
Mm,
proper awareness of what it's all about. I think that schools uh, um, go down a programs based approach
mm,
really straight away, thinking that if I pay for a program and then I've got this lesson and my teachers do it every week, that covers SEL. But it that's kind of surface level SEL to me. Yes, it's easier for the teachers, and to be honest, the teacher workload is quite high, but to be able to train the teachers correctly, get the right facilitators in there, make sure that the teachers really understand what SEL is all about, what SEL implementation looks like, what it looks like across the school compared to what it looks like in your classroom, because that's different, and being able to differentiate from that's really important.
I love that your school has you in the school because
Yeah.
I know that not all schools are able to have that. And I was speaking to an SEL consultant in the States, and she was responsible for a district, which is I don't know how many schools, but many schools. And her job opened up during the pandemic, and now this 2-year contract is over, and in my opinion, it's when they need it the most.
Yeah, that's right.
So, I hope that these schools can continue implementing the programs she started. And I'm
Sure.
sure this is across the board, in different states or different places in Canada. If somebody's listening right now, maybe SEL is something new to them. How about we kind of make sure we're all at the same level? What are we talking
Yeah.
about when we talk about social emotional learning?
Yeah, so SEL is all about, if you were to look at the definition, Castle, I guess firstly, Castle is an organization that's been around for over 25 years, and they're at the forefront of SEL research, um, how to implement SEL. And basically their definition, uh, if I simplify the definition of SEL, it is establishing essential life skills and being able to knowledge build and skill develop and attitude shift towards what we call their five competencies. And basically, it's creating a partnership also between schools, families, and communities, and transferring that information and the practices from schools across to the home and getting the community involved. It's about really empowering the kids to really create, I guess, eventually a community or a society that's just safe and healthy,
Mm,
really.
mm.
And I would just say lastly that true SEL promotes, diversity, inclusion. But the last thing that's really important, it makes schools culturally responsive, because when we're talking about emotions and feelings, what an emotion looks like here in North America and the way that we respond to one looks completely different in Japan,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so for schools to be culturally responsive, that's really important.
I love that you brought that up. That is such an important part. And then we need to be aware of that too, like
Yeah,
the
totally.
differences. Yeah. Okay, so now that somebody knows about this and understands what it is, what does it look like? Because I know a popular, maybe some people or teachers have never heard of Castle, maybe some have. I know that
Yeah,
zones of regulation is something that we hear more often. I've heard it from
yeah,
friends of
sure.
mine as well. Where I don't even know where to begin this conversation.
Maybe we should just go over the five competencies. We broadly, I guess, summarized SEL being these life skills. Well, what are the actual competencies themselves? So we have self awareness. So it's developing a sense of oneself, really understanding your thoughts and feelings and emotions and being able to build that. And to make this really clear, SEL is not just for the kids. It's for
Mm,
anyone inside the school, whether it's a teacher, a janitor, or a student. SEL is for all of us, right?
mm,
So self-awareness, building those thoughts and feelings and becoming aware of your own identity. That's the first competency. We have self-management, which is how do I manage those thoughts and feelings and to achieve my goals. We have social awareness, so understanding the views and perspective of others, I guess, through kind of like an empathy lens.
mhm.
And you've got relationship skills, which is learning to communicate, connect, and problem solve and be able to stand up for others. And then the last one is responsible decision making. So it's all about making constructive choices, reflecting on those choices to be able to find solutions. And so SEL is all about developing those five competencies. I always say, self awareness is so important because it's the foundation. You can't make a responsible decision without being self aware, and you can't be socially aware of others if you're not self-aware. So it's just really important to be able to navigate those competencies. And what school's doing really well because you can see all the five competencies in certain elements of teaching, So that's really important.
I love that you just brought that up because I think a parent who's listening or even an educator, perhaps they are wondering, should my grade 2 students, make responsible decisions? And they're not the way when you are, outlining these different levels. Well, I see them as levels. I see them, like you said, like the foundation truly is self-awareness.
Sure.
And then so are we building up on this, or are we taking these 5 competencies and teaching them in grade 1? Like how is it divided in the schools?
Yeah, you do teach all five, but they look different, don't they?
Mm,
Like they look completely different. A responsible decision for a kindergarten student is just being able to stop when you're asked to, or just quickly stop before I go off and throw that shovel or that
mhm,
snowball or something like that. That's that responsible decision. Whereas a grade six, it's more about being aware of, you're around a group of people that they might be speaking about someone indirectly and you're not really cool with what they're
mhm.
saying and then being an upstander instead of a bystander, like, hey guys, I don't think this is cool right now. Maybe we could, you know, change the topic, or if we've got a problem with someone, let's go and speak to them face to face or something like that. So
And I can understand how some of these impact behavior as well, right? If you're not able to
yeah,
stop
sure.
yourself, and this comes back to what you said at the beginning, if you're not able to stop yourself or think about what should be right or wrong, then you're going to act on that, and then it's disciplined rather than, well, it should be, the discipline part is okay, but there has to be some sort of educational component as well in terms of how to teach the child these skills.
The discipline end is really important that it's a restorative type discipline end.
Mm.
So when we talk about that, and I guess I'm already segueing into what you know practices we should see across schools when it comes to
Sure.
SEL.
Mhm.
But these signature practices are ones that we could see from kindergarten all the way to year 12, basically, right? And one of them, and we'll go back to discipline, would be kind of like not kind of, but supportive discipline practices. So it comes from a restorative end. It's heavily influenced by what we call restorative justice, and restorative justice is really an approach to provide an opportunity to repair harm. So what we do is we create a safe space. We have open communication. We come up with what do we feel is the right response, and the victim and and the perpetrator, I guess
Mhm.
the other word could be, is responsible in coming up with how to repair the harm. There's a healing process so that everyone understands. And the reason why this is so powerful, because at the end of the process, empathy is being built.
Mm.
So I know how I've impacted you. You know how you've got an opportunity to explain to me how it's impacted, and then we can leave with an opportunity to repair that harm. So that's really important.
I am sure there are parents that just heard this and had this sort of aha moment of like, wow, this this can make a big difference if we
Yeah,
have this approach, not just in schools, but in homes too. I've often spoken to parents who have children between the ages of 6 and 9, and there's a lot of content out there, including myself with Curious Neuron, where we cover 0 to 5, 0 to 6, and then there's the content on teenagers. But the kids in between that, what does discipline look like? We know discipline is education in young kids, but having this sort of framework that you just painted, I think allows parents to see how there still is an education component. It's not just about go in your room, no more iPad, no TV, no whatever it is for a week, but what
yeah,
is the conversation happening there and how are you building the SEL skills through the conversation you're having? Like you said, the empathy part
sure.
comes in there. I love that.
And it's great. It's great because for restorative practice to happen, another signature practice is what we call community circles.
Mm.
So a community circle um, is basically the schools. So I'll give you an example. On a Monday, when my class comes in, we always come in and we stand in a circle. So by standing in a circle, I'll have some form of prompt, like tell me the best thing that you ate on the weekend. And by having a circle, the reason why we have this circle is because one, it provides an opportunity to build community within your classroom.
Mm.
Two, it gives everyone an opportunity to speak. So when you have a community circle, we have something called a talking piece, and we have circle expectations, are like active listening, um, something like say just enough. Confidentiality is really important. So we teach about confidentiality, right? And so that all the kids will answer the question. And if you do this on a regular basis, you've got this introvert student who doesn't really get an opportunity to say something. But when it's community circle time, they always get their opportunity to say something. And you've got this extrovert student who's always saying something, but has to learn to actually be patient because they don't have the talking piece right now.
Mm.
Do you get what I'm trying to say?
Mhm.
So it's creating a sense of community. And
Mm.
the reason why we have this community circle is because then when things go wrong and we have to go into a restorative justice or restorative circle, we call it a restorative mediation. We do that mediation in a circle, and so we use the same talking piece. And by doing that, it actually creates an environment where you imagine when you're in trouble and you're super heightened, but because you know it's a circle, oh, I know what the circle's all about. It brings that level of energy down. It brings the kids back into the thinking part of the brain, the prefrontal, and then we can go through that mediation. So it's sort of with community circles and restorative practice, they sort of intertwine. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're two really important practices.
That is amazing, and I love what you just said about the frontal lobe and the thinking part because that's exactly what I was picturing. You've created a safe space for that student, and knowing that circle equals a safe space to communicate and to open up and to it's both a safe space physically but also emotionally, right? And now the child is more likely to kind of open up in that situation and think better because when we don't feel safe, then we're blocking all of that communication to our frontal lobe. We're blocking that thinking. I
Mhm.
absolutely love that. You've been mentioning signature practices a
Yeah.
few times. What do you mean when you say that? And how does a school or a parent now that's listening, how do they know if their school is implementing that?
So I guess two of them were the community circles and the restorative practice. These are very common SEL practices. These are ones that if a school was to um, contact a consultant or someone who is well versed in SEL, or you look at Castle, these are practices that are highly recommended. They're evidence based. Um, you know, if I was a parent and I was asking about SEL, I would just say, what are your signature practices? What do you do across the school uh, to make sure that you can maintain this kind of safe space, this environment that promotes community, that builds self awareness, that's going to build my child's empathy, and
Mm.
just see what the schools comes up with, basically.
And what if they don't mention anything that you just said right now?
Yeah, I would then be asking the school, what are their goals towards social emotional learning? Where are you? Every school has some form of planning in place, forward planning or strategic planning for years to come and so on. Is there any form of implementation that we're explicit implementation is as part of that planning so that you're going to get a view as to if it's in place or if not. Parents also have an opportunity and a voice in terms of most schools will have a parent board of some sort. So
Mhm.
you might want to go down that path or that realm as to, hey, how can we help our school? What can we bring in?
Sure.
How can we help the teachers themselves? Because it might be a financial difficulty. It might be, we're not really sure, it might be a time difficulty or something like that.
Let's say it is a bit of those of both, right? So let's say a parent says, "I want to move forward and help my school do this," or or there's a teacher listening and they say, "I want to make sure I'm including what Carl just said in my classroom." Um, so yes, there's perhaps a money factor and a time factor, and this is something I wanted to touch on with you. What is out there for as a resource now?
Sure.
Somebody could Google CASEL, which is CASEL. Once they do that, they'll have access to some content. I know we mentioned the zones of regulation because it seems to be very common. Is
Yeah.
there anything else? We've spoken together about Permission to Feel by Mark Brackett, Dr. Mark Brackett.
Yeah.
And I think you can find Ruler online and some content there.
A little bit of it,
Is that
yeah.
a good start for them to because
Yeah,
also, yeah, they're looking for something simple, right, to understand and to implement.
that's right. I would always start with Castle, and I would check, just to get a really clear idea of what social emotional learning is all about. Some of the signature practices that they recommend also, so they have, some signature practices that can be easily implemented into the classroom. Anyone can access that, and it's free, basically. The other component the Castle has is they have a program guide. So when a school's looking for a program, they've already rated certain programs. And depending on the needs assessment of a school, because it's very important for a school to do what we call a needs assessment first. So when we're doing this needs assessment, we're figuring out, what are we doing really well and what are
Mhm.
we not doing really well? And then we focus on the part that we need to improve. Now, at the end of the day, also, and I really want to bring this up, lots of schools are indirectly teaching SEL
Mm.
anyway. They just don't know it. So when you do this needs assessment and you go down the path and you pull out the competencies and you start kind of brainstorming. So for self awareness, this is what it is. What do we do? A lot of schools will be like, oh, we already do this. We already have a lot of this. We just didn't know it was SEL. So just doing some form of assessment is really important too.
That's a thank you for that. I think that really helps, align what somebody can do to get that into their school and where they can start with resources.
Yeah,
Um,
sure.
just to touch on, there was a teacher that asked, how they can start with certain activities that are very easy within the classroom, especially with younger kids, pre-K,
Yeah.
kindergarten, grade 1. We started talking about like these competencies and like what self-awareness would look like. Do you have any advice for a teacher who here I'm assuming doesn't have some sort of framework that she can do and maybe just wants like the baby steps, like how do we start implementing within a classroom for a very young child?
Yeah. I would always start with Um, so we covered some circle work. You can easily do the community circles with the little ones,
Mm.
and it's very conducive to like a kindergarten class because we already sit in circles in kindergarten. So just adding that component of a community circle to your teaching is very easy. Um, I would go down the emotional literacy path. Sorry, so um, implementing some form of emotional literacy tool. So we've already touched on it, but the mood meter that's from Ruler or the zones of regulation, he actually has their own kind of emotional literacy. We really do need this because we want to. Emotional literacy is not just expanding our kids' emotional vocabulary, is it? It's more them recognizing,
Yeah.
them understanding, and then them labeling. It's not just about labeling. Um, and regardless of if it's a mood meter or the zones of regulation or a feelings wheel that you see around,
Yeah.
regardless of any of them, they're still great tools to have in the classroom. Now, how we use them, we would use them as check-ins. So um, getting the kids that when they arrive in the morning, you check in. So the little kindergarten ones at our school, they go up to the mood meter, they move their name to the color, and they do their own little check-in. And it's really cool because for kindergarten kids to be able to walk in and then move their name onto a yellow or a red, um, what they're doing is they're reflecting out there. "Oh, well, this is how I'm feeling, and I'm showing it." And it's also providing everyone in the classroom with an understanding. Oh, Jack's in the red right now. He might be a little angry. I might need to give him a little bit of space.
Mm.
Or um, little Olivia is in blue right now, and blue's low energy and unpleasant. So we will we would associate maybe a little sadness with that. So Olivia's sad. Maybe I should go up to her and give her a little cuddle or see how
Mm.
she's going. So a little check-in is super cool, but a check-in looks different for the older ones. So from grade 3 all the way up to high school, check-ins are private. So we want people to be able to check in and reflect or journal by themselves, and it looks different, but still a check-in provides you with that same service of being able to recognize, understand, label, and then get to a point where I need to regulate too. Because
Mhm.
right now I've checked in, I'm red, I'm in grade 6. I'm in the red. I'm angry. Something's happened at home. I know that before I get started for class, I got to pull out one of my regulatory tools. So simple check-ins is something that everyone could easily implement at school, which is a really cool one.
And what a powerful tool to start the day with because, I had this conversation with Dr. Bruce Perry where he spoke about the dysregulated classroom and we're teaching a bunch of students sometimes who are not regulated. And going back to what we said before, if you're dysregulated, your brain isn't functioning the same way. You're not thinking the same way. You're not rational. You're not remembering or problem solving the same way since that connection to the frontal lobe isn't the same. So if we can do just that, I think it's a really good start. And thank you for bringing up that naming emotions is not just the only thing, because I think sometimes we think that that's like a really big goal. Like, sure, my child knows when they're mad, and I often speak with parents that have younger kids, but my child will say, "I'm mad." So why aren't they regulated? Like, why can't they calm down after that? But there's a lot that goes on before that. Like, what does your body feel like when it's mad? Is a child able to say that? Are you able to recognize? I use a mountain for younger kids, but as your emotions are getting stronger, you're sort of climbing up this like emotions mountain. And before you get to the peak where you're completely dysregulated, were you able to actually recognize? And I think
Yeah, it's
even
great.
as adults, we struggle with that because that's
Yeah,
why
totally.
as adults we snap. We use that term snapped. And I picture that as like the same thing as a tantrum. Right, with
Yeah,
young kids, we say they're having a tantrum, and I'm trying to move parents away from that term because it's just them having lost control. They're at the top of that mountain. They're completely dysregulated, the same way that we are completely dysregulated sometimes. We say things we regret, we do things we regret, and we're like, "Oh, why did I yell at my kid? Like, they didn't do anything wrong, but I wasn't even aware that I was dysregulated and I was in the red zone, and that's why I snapped at them," right? So, such a good
yeah,
practice to have. But I would say both at school and at home. Why not check in
yeah.
once in a while?
Yeah, for sure. And just to back onto what you said, so we've mentioned emotional literacy tools, we've
Mm,
mentioned community circles, we've mentioned restorative practices, signature, but also if we want to add another signature and simple one, just having regulatory tools in the
mm,
classroom. Like it's not difficult to have some Play-Doh. It's not difficult to have a little stressful. It's not difficult to have a little space in the classroom where we can separate ourselves, where it might be a soft chair,
Mhm.
it might be a couch of some sort. My classroom has a couch. We have an ongoing jigsaw puzzle that when the kids just need some space, they can go over and do the jigsaw puzzle, and then when they're ready, they just return back to working. So just having the opportunity for, in the ideal world, I say this all the time, and this is heavily influenced by Dr. Stuart Shanker's work at the Merit Center, but that was saying that in the ideal world, a classroom would have an upregulated spot and a downregulated spot. Because if children know what they need, if they've got too much energy, they need to burn it somewhere. And if they don't have enough energy, they need to restore. So can you imagine having like two micro environments in every classroom that the kids know that I can go to this one for lots of energy, or I need to energy, and I can go to this one to restore my energy. That would be super cool
Wow.
in the ideal world.
That would be that. And I think often when we have very young kids, we look at that energy as a negative thing because it's hard for us to deal with it, especially if we
Yeah.
can't meet them at that level, which we often can't. But having that conversation with their child of sometimes we do have a lot of energy, and I think of myself too, like, if I work at nighttime and I've been building on ideas and I go to bed, there's absolutely no way that I'm going to fall asleep. It's just
Not a
not gonna
chance.
happen, right? Like,
No.
I'm dysregulated in a good way. I'm happy, I'm excited, I'm pumped about some sort of idea that I have, but I'm completely dysregulated, and that equals a night awake. And we have to kind
Yeah.
of give our kids those skills to recognize those moments, and I agree with you. If that could be part of every classroom, whoever's listening to this, that would
Yeah.
be great. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's something that it doesn't have to be expensive either. It could be just some elastics in a spot where children can move their legs or something. A
Mm.
bit of Yeah, it doesn't have to be these, some schools have bicycles where the kids can ride while they're working and so on, but we can't all afford that kind of equipment. So we can be creative. We
Yeah.
can still create those environments, just be creative.
You said something that reminded me of a question that I received on Instagram. People were anticipating this conversation, but they asked, what do you consider the most important skill to form healthy relationships from an SEL approach? You said something
Yeah.
right now that's why I want to bring it up, but you mentioned stepping away. Like if little, Bobby comes into the classroom and is in the red zone, then the students could at least say like that person needs space. Or when you're older, recognizing that you need some space. I think about relationships now and what a powerful tool to have if you know you're dysregulated, not to go into an argument with a partner and to say
Yeah.
like, I need to take space, right? To have those communication skills when it comes to emotions. I'm assuming how not assuming, I'm wondering how you would approach this question given your background.
Yeah. Look, relationships is such a complex, I guess discussion, isn't it? But I had like a formula that I always, when I go and consult, I say to teachers that in the ideal world, we need to build trust. So how do we build trust? And I say to teachers, well, my formula for trust is the following. It is authentic relationships plus safety equals trust. If I can have an authentic relationship where the students come in the morning, I greet them, but I'm not greeting them like standing at the front. I'm personally going up to them and greeting them, and they feel welcomed and they feel safe. And then I hear them when they have their problem. I make time to hear them. I sit with them. I make sure that they feel like they're being heard, they're being seen, they're being valued. Then I'm forever going to have their trust. And that's what an authentic relationship really is, isn't it? So, if you can create that authenticity between yourself and the child, plus make sure that they feel completely safe, then you're going to get that trust
Yeah.
time.
What an amazing formula, I think, to follow, and simple enough for us to keep at the top of
Yeah,
mind.
for sure.
I unfortunately have to sort of, end this conversation.
Yeah.
I had so many other questions, and for those of you that are listening, my email, info@curiouslearn.com. Just send me an email and say, "Bring Carl back," and I'll bring Carl back because I know I'm gonna get those.
I'm happy to come back. That's for sure.
I love that you're close too. We need to meet up for coffee, once in a
I'd
while
love to.
because there's just so much to talk about around this. I want to go back to some of the questions, and if there's something we missed, please let's bring it up before we finish this. But um, so here, one person asked about the language to model to our students as a school. Example: colored zones of regulation. I'm in red. I can try breathing. Are you able to sort of address that? I'm not sure
Yeah,
exactly what the question is with that, but
sure. I think also, look, we really need to change the narrative of these colors, and I think we can get really confused, right? When we label, or especially when we use emotional literacy tools, the some people's understanding is that you have to always be in the green. So the green zone,
mm,
we would say, is a calm zone. You have to be in the green to learn. And I would say incorrect,
mm,
right? Because and Yale University does a really good job of this. If I need to be creative, I can't be calm. If I need to be creative, I need to have a high amount of energy. I need to be uh, quite motivated to do something. So that would put me in the yellow zone. So any form of creativity would be in the yellow. Now, if I'm doing a debate and I need to really get my point across, then I need some form of worry, but I need some
mm,
form of assertiveness, like kind of anger. So that would mean that I would be in the red. So a lot of people think like the red zone is angry, it's worried, it's anxious, and so on. And you can't be there to learn. Well, that's not correct because we need to have certain feelings to drive certain types of learning. And so it's really important that we all understand that, emotions have this functional capacity, it's to approach or to avoid. But from a learning perspective, you don't, uh, if you're not emotionally connected to your work, then you're not going to learn anyway. So that's really important when it comes to that.
such an important point. Thank goodness you said all this because
Yeah.
now I'm thinking of a teacher who, let's say this teacher in particular starts to implement what we said and has the morning check-ins with her or his students or their students. Now, I'm looking at the wall and I see that I have some kids in the red zone, some in the yellow, some in the green. The other one is blue, I believe, right? So a
Yeah.
little bit of a mix of everything. And now I need to teach math, or I need to, or we're creating a story this morning, whatever it is. Am I going to manage my classroom a little differently given that I see, 3 students in the red zone? Am I going to give them space and not ask them to answer something today?
Yeah.
Or maybe they're in the red zone because they're fired up and they have a test that day and they're thinking about it. I don't know. Like, how would I manage my classroom given these different levels of emotional states?
Yeah, I think you've clearly made the connection. So when you're doing your checking, it's providing feedback for teacher, isn't it? So basically, you're doing the check in. If it was the older kids, you would ask, "Do you mind if I have a look at what you've got on your check in?" Like, I don't want to know the answers. I just want to know what color, right? So you're getting a clear indication. Oh, I've got 60% of my children right now in the red or in the blue. Now, starting the day like that, I might need to shift what I'm teaching
Mm.
to help them bring them back to a point where then they can go on with something more complex. Because if I've got you in a heightened state and then I'm bringing in long division, you're not going to be able to follow the steps. That's the reality.
Mm.
But if I've got everyone in a heightened state and we're going to do a reading strategy instead, we're going to read let's just read our class novel of some sort. That'll bring everyone back down, and then we can do the long division later on. So yes, does it provide feedback? Yes. Um, but if it's a smaller group, then you would just check in personally, wouldn't you? I'd pull you aside. I could see you're in the red. Is anything I can do? We're about to go into long division. Do you think you could? Do you think this is something you could do? No. Okay. Do you know what I mean? And then we adapt that way. So
This kind of I've been using this term a little bit more often now, but being aware and emotionally aware. And what you've just kind of painted is this classroom and these teachers that are emotionally aware and just moving forward. We're not trying to get out of the red zone right away. We're sitting with it, but we're aware that we're in the red zone.
yeah,
Um, I love this. Thank you for chatting with me. I think to finish off this conversation, I'd love to hear from you in terms of what is your ideal or what would success look like, if we look at SEL in the classrooms? What's your like dream, I guess, of what you'd like to see in the classrooms?
yeah. I guess my dream is just to have happy children, really, isn't it? Like, children who are walk into the classroom, they're smiling, they're ready to be creative, to be children.
Be
Sometimes
children.
we suppress the children part, um, and just to feel safe. Once we've got all of
Yeah.
that, then they're ready to learn and to grow. So that's the most important thing.
Thank you for chatting with me again, and I hope we do get to chat again soon. Thank you to everyone who's listening. Please make sure you take a moment to review the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen. Leave a rating. Send me an email if you do at info@curiousneuron.com. I will send you Emotional Meltdown Mountain, which is a PDF to help you with a visual. And follow us on Instagram, curious_neuron. Visit our YouTube channel. The video of this podcast will be up there. And that is it. Thank you to everyone, and I will see you next time.